They put a 25-year-old man with less than 3 years of service in our agency to do my job that I had successfully done for over 5 years.
That amounted to discrimination because you believe he got the job because he was gay and you're straight.
Correct.
Marlene Ames was working for the Ohio Department of Youth Services when a position opened up as bureau chief.
And then you decided to put in for a promotion.
Yes. My supervisor at the time asked if I was going to apply.
But just a few days after she got her 30-year service pin, Ames found out instead of a promotion, she was being demoted to a secretary.
It was humiliating going to work every day.
Humiliating.
Yes.
They cut your salary almost in half.
Yes, $40,000. So of course I went into a panic over that.
The colleague who replaced her was gay, and shortly afterward, the promotion went to a woman who was also gay.
Thought, okay, well, there's something more at play here.
The Supreme Court just ruled that reverse discrimination is still discrimination. In other words, discriminating against somebody because they're heterosexual or white is illegal. And this is why I voted for Trump.
Boy, I gotta tell you guys, liberals are fuming over the Supreme Court delivering a massive victory for straight rights. Yes, us straight people, we have the same civil rights as everybody else, okay? And when we are discriminated against, we should have the same opportunities to remedy the discrimination, to seek justice in the court of law like everybody else. And the Supreme Court basically confirmed that today, as they are allowing a Ohio woman to move forward with a reverse discrimination suit. Now, this is a big deal, because basically what the Supreme Court is confirming is that if you are part of a so-called majority, right, and you are one of these people that, you know, society sees as privilege because, again, you have not been historically discriminated against, that, hey, the Civil Rights Act still applies to you, mainly if you are white, straight, male, Christian, right? The Civil Rights Act still applies to you, right? The Civil Rights Act is not just for the gays, the trans, the blacks, right? The women, okay, the Latinos, right? It's not just for them. It also applies to everybody else as well, too, okay? This is a massive victory during Pride Month for the straights, okay? This is a straight pride victory. Like I told you guys, the liberals, they don't really like this.
She's upset because she went for a promotion and a lesbian was hired instead. I mean, was that part of the qualification? I thought that when it comes to job interviews, it is illegal to ask those type of questions. It is illegal to even like have that be a part of your interview process when it comes to your sexuality or your religion or your race or your gender. So she's mad that a lesbian got the promotion, she got demoted, and a gay man took her spot. Could it just be coincidence that these people who got... Could it be just a coincidence that the people who got hired for these positions just so happen to be homosexual? It's probably a high coincidence. It's kind of... We're just going to have to wait to see what proof comes out. And I'm like, there must be some type of proof for the Supreme Court to make this decision. But we all know how the Supreme Court likes to work. And we all know that the Supreme Court now doesn't work in our favor. So we'll have to wait and see how this turns out. But I just think that this is not a good thing.
The Supreme Court just unanimously sided with a woman who is claiming that she was discriminated against because she is, wait for it, straight. Let me repeat. The Supreme Court just unanimously sided with a woman claiming reverse discrimination and that she was passed up for a promotion at work because she is, again, heterosexual. The justice's decision affects lawsuits in 20 states and the District of Columbia, where until now, courts had set a higher bar when members of a majority group, including those who are white and heterosexual, sue for discrimination under federal law. So it wasn't that before this case, you couldn't sue for discrimination if you're white or you're heterosexual. It's just that there was a higher bar for you to prove that that actually happened. But now it's going to be much easier for people to claim reverse discrimination, whether it be racially or in terms of sexual orientation. During Pride Month of all motherfucking months, bro. This is bad. This is setting a really dangerous precedent. What else is new?
I just think this is really irresponsible. The phrasing, the wording is going to set a really bad precedent. The last thing that we need is for the Supreme Court to make reverse discrimination a thing. Discrimination is sufficient enough. What we don't need is this. I'm not saying this lawsuit is invalid, but it's the reverse discrimination part that I have a problem with. Because with the dismembering of DEI, and now you can supposedly, report that you think somebody didn't get a job based on their merit because, somebody with different color skin got a promotion at their job. You can check into that. I just feel like we're starting to open doors we can't close.
And it's going to be reverse racism, and then millennials, why don't we just make fetch a thing? Some of us can't just jump out of the timeline.
The court isn't neutral. It's a hammer for the regime. The Supreme Court's latest ruling in Ames versus Ohio Department of Youth Services doesn't just smell like ideology, it reeks of it, like gym socks stuffed in a church pew. Let's be honest, this court is not defending civil rights, it's defending a narrative. And that narrative is white, straight, Christian grievance wrapped in the soft fabric of equality under law. They're not reversing discrimination, they're reversing progress. And they're doing it with a smile and a robe and the full institutional weight of the judiciary that has been reprogrammed like a dying hard drive to believe that fairness means letting white people sue because their feelings got hurt by inclusion.
Yeah, so once again, we have liberals showing you guys exactly what I've been telling you about these people for the longest time. They're not fighting for equal rights. They're fighting for special rights, okay? Because if you were actually fighting for equal rights, equality, treating everybody fairly and the same, okay, in the eyes of the law, right? If you're fighting against discrimination, then how can you disagree with this, right? You should be against discrimination when it comes to anybody, right? Based off race, sex, who you like to sleep with, whether or not you like your genitalia, whatever, right? All of that, okay? You should not be okay with discrimination. But they're basically telling you that they are okay with discrimination. They're just okay with discrimination against whites and men and Christians, right? That is what they're telling you, right? And straight people. That's what they're telling you. That's exactly what they're telling you, because only somebody that's okay with that discrimination would be mad about this ruling from the Supreme Court, in which they're just allowing the lawsuit to move forward, right? They're essentially lowering the bar and saying, yes, you don't have to meet a higher standard to sue when you think that you've been discriminated against, even if you are, again, white or straight or male or whatever, right? So without further ado, let's learn a little bit more about this ruling from the Supreme Court that was unanimous, by the way, right? Even Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's woke as hell, sided with the rest of the court, the conservatives, in this ruling.
Devin, this discrimination case is a big one. What's the expected impact of this ruling?
Well, a very interesting case, Diane. This involved alleged reverse discrimination by a straight woman alleging being passed over for a job because she was not gay by a gay employer. And what the Supreme Court unanimously said today in this opinion by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is that the standard is the same no matter whether you're in a minority group or a majority group alleging discrimination. It's the same test for everybody under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which of course prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex or sexual orientation. What had happened in this case is Marlene Ames, the plaintiff who was seeking to sue the Ohio Department of Youth Services, where she had worked for 15 years, brought her claims to court. They were tossed out by a federal appeals court that said she had to prove something higher because she was a white straight woman. She had to show some background circumstances in order to even get in the courthouse door. But what the Supreme Court said today is it's a level playing field for everybody under Title VII, no matter who you are. You simply have to show a plausible case of discrimination, and then you can bring your claim.
Think about how messed up that is. The fact that this had to get to the Supreme Court shows you the activism, the woke activism within our justice system, right? I mean, think about that. A federal court, a lower court said, nah, you're white. You got to meet a higher standard, which in and of itself is discriminatory. You're white and straight. No. You have to meet a higher standard because discrimination based off your protected characteristics, right? That's not possible, right? It's not possible. You got to show us more than what somebody else had to show in order to prove that you've been discriminated against. That's insanity. That is absolute insanity. How can anybody be okay with this? This should not have gotten to the Supreme Court. This should have been resolved in the lower courts. This should have been allowed to move forward. Now, again, if, she can prove it, that's a whole different conversation about whether or not she can prove it. But she shouldn't have to meet a higher standard than everybody else to just move forward with it, to get her case in court just because she's white and straight. That's crazy. Absolutely insane.
So, James, what stands out to you from the court's opinion in this case?
Well, Devin's summary there, Diana, is extraordinarily thorough, as always. The thing that I would say here is that this is, in a sense, the Supreme Court was ruling today as to a Court of Appeals decision that had applied not in all of the circuits across the country, but in many of the circuits, roughly half of the circuits across the country, in interpreting the Civil Rights Act. There was a 1981 decision in the D.C. Circuit that essentially said that if you were claiming discrimination, but you were not a member of a historically discriminated against group, so here a white straight woman, that you needed to provide additional background circumstances, that there was essentially an additional predicate hurdle that you needed to clear that wouldn't necessarily be a hurdle that an individual who was from one of those groups would need to have cleared. And so the Supreme Court, in addition to the technical aspects of this decision, essentially, and particularly I think because this is a unanimous decision, is saying that whatever the disagreements that still remain with respect, and there are many, with respect to how the Civil Rights Act applies and how the Civil Rights Act applies, particularly to so-called reverse discrimination suits, the Supreme Court, in essence, today, in a unanimous ruling, as Devin said, by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, said, basically, we are no longer in 1981. At least with respect to federal discrimination law, the court is saying, this is no longer 1981. The same standards need to apply. And to be clear, this does not mean that Ames wins her case. It just means she gets another chance to press the case without that hurdle.
Wow. That is fascinating. That is extremely interesting. Ketanji Brown Jackson, even she recognized that, hey, we're not living during that time period anymore, right? We're living in 2025. We can treat everybody equally. We don't need this anymore. I mean, this is honestly really bad for the reparations people, right? Who think that they're going to make reparations happen legally. It's definitely not going to happen. Not considering the recent Supreme Court rulings. This one, including the affirmative action one. Yeah, I mean, this is essentially close the door shut on reparations. But besides that, right, this is a ruling that, in my opinion, confirms that there was, in fact, systemic discrimination that exists within our system against whites, right? That's the irony here, because so-called minorities, right, always boohoo, whine, and cry. There's systemic discrimination against me. I gotta work 10 times as hard as the white man, right? Because there's all these roadblocks. But they can never actually give you any concrete examples of the systemic discrimination, right? They can't give you any real examples. This is an actual real example, a concrete example of systemic discrimination against whites, against straights, against people that are in a majority group, because she quite literally had to meet a higher standard. AKA, she had a roadblock in the way of her filing a discrimination lawsuit against somebody because of her skin color and her sexuality, right? Again, that's what that is. That is systemic discrimination. That's what it is, okay? She was systemically discriminated against. The court said, nah, you can't sue because of your race and your sexuality. That is textbook systemic discrimination. And the Supreme Court just remedied that. Again, fascinating story. Fascinating. Again, this is a victory for straight rights, right? And for equality, right? That's what this is a victory for. This is an equal rights victory that, you know, at one point in time, most of this country used to believe in, but nowadays, apparently, this is controversial stuff to the left. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.